In response to hearing about a fellow student killing himself the night before, the guy next to me in class exclaimed, "Wow, I just made fun of that kid yesterday, what a pee," and laughed about it. What is the most inhumane thing you've witnessed, Reddit? Overheard two young girls talking about their teenage friend who had caused a car accident that had killed my neighbor. It doesn't matter, he was old anyway. Felt hot red anger engulf my body. It was painful. Coming across a woman whose baby was cut out of her and a dead cat at it. This was in the Croatian War of Independence in the early 90s. She was still alive and begging to be shot. I knew what else they did to her, but they carted her away, UN ambulance, and I never knew what happened to her. I still hear her when I try to sleep. It took me a while to process the first sentence. That's freaking horrifying. When I was 14, my mom died and I broke down crying because of it during recess in high school. A fellow student came up to me and told me to snap out of it because she knew somebody who had it worse than I. I deliver Chinese food on the weekends for extra cash. We have these punk butt kids that come in and terrorize the Chinese people that run the place. When I first started, I came in at 5 PM for my first day and these kids were in there ordering food while talking like the people behind the counter. The one kid, who must have been 14 or 15, said she doesn't freaking know what we are saying. She is a freaking C-slanted IB. That was it. I turned on my inner honey badger and flipped crap on this kid. Basically something like, "You mother, you have no freaking idea what they go through. Should I make fun of your freaking dumb as frick hat, or that you have to come in here and spend you parents' money and harass this lady just trying to make a living?" He responds with, "A frick you, I am only 15. And I say, I don't give a flying frick if you are 50. You do not treat people like that. Do not think I will not knock you the frick out. I have no problem going back to prison, son." His friend and him just walked out, red-faced and all. They ride their bikes around from time to time but rarely come in. If they do come in, it is to buy a soda and then get the frick out. Honey badger mission has been successful, at least between the hours of 5-8 PM Friday, son. Also, I have never been to prison. Till if I wanna sound like a badass, I should say I have no problem going back to prison. In terms of the bullying and rumors scenario, since I only really have one other inhumane story, and it makes no sense, my brother was murdered in the hospital. Specifically, he was in the mental health ward. For the third time, his medication cocktail wasn't correctly balanced, as that sort of thing is hard to get right, and he tried to get a nurse to give him a hug for lack of human contact. He was strangled by 3 orderlies for 17 minutes and injected with sedatives. When his corpse was wheeled down to the ER for an attempt at resuscitation, the ER staff noted all the neck bruising and other telltale indicators that showed that proper restraining procedure was in no way followed. The hospital knew they were in deep crap. The visitor log from that day went missing. The director took an early retirement, and rumors started to flow around town that my brother had overdosed on drugs in hospital care. Basically being told by your peers and classmates that your grief and anger is misplaced because your brother's death was his own fault and he was nothing more than a freaking drug addict. I kind of feel more guilty these days that I didn't beat the heck out of someone. I still retain a lot of anger thinking about the whole situation. Relating to her suicide, my friend, let's call her Shelby, committed suicide last year and everyone knew her favorite song was If I Die Young by the band Perry, SP. Well, a few days ago, her sister, let's call her Sandy, was in ceramics class and the teacher had the stereo on. If I Die Young started to play and another girl announced to the class, "Oh, careful, Sandy is about to start crying." Ellen started laughing and laughing and laughing. What kind of creature does that? Dang. I remember being at a birthday party of a friend of mine. An old song, Summer Jam, started playing and hit me in the stomach like a train. I went outside and 5 minutes later they came outside asking what's up. Explained them that the song reminded me of bad times and I had a hard time dealing with it. They treated me with a beer and left me on my own a while. Dang, I miss those people. I have a good friend who has dry skin. Dry skin to the point where she's constantly shedding peeling, mostly on her arms and legs. She now uses a certain type of cream or something to help regulate it, but back in middle school, for one reason or another, she didn't use it as often. Anyway, this was back in those days where anger was actually cool, and people would blog about everyday things. Certain people would write posts about her, saying her boobs were misshapen. She says oh, WTF is that? Is that supposed to represent her uneven boobs for example, and just generally unkind things about her? In Japanese class, we had a party of some kind where everyone brought food. She helped herself to some popcorn, grabbing a small handful. As she did, a boy in our class yelled, "Oh my god, she touched the popcorn. I don't want popcorn anymore. Look at her arms." Silver lining. In the end she wrote a very thorough and calm, "If I was her, I'd end up raging." She handled it really well. Post on her Zanga speaking about her skin issue and the teasing that she's received. People read it, and some even went up to her and told her sorry. They eventually stopped teasing her altogether. Props to your friend. Very mature way to handle it. Last summer my next door neighbor was murdered by his daughter's boyfriend after a drunken argument. It was really sad as his wife had to move into an old folks home because she can't take care of herself. The next day a female friends of mine wouldn't shut the heck up about how she dated the murderer several years prior and how it could have been me in every conversation she got in for the next month. No remorse for that poor family whatsoever. Ugh. I hate when people need to make everything their own personal tragedy. It lacks all tact. A kid at my school died in a car accident last October. He was quite popular at school, so many of the students were grieving and memorializing him in different ways. Nobody wanted to talk, and the school had this dark air to it. One girl, who had not known the deceased, said to me, "It's so serene today. I can finally get my work done. Whoa, I wish people would die more often." We were talking about how a girl wasn't at school because her father recently died. A girl in class says something along the lines of, "I'm glad her father's dead. She had it coming." We all got mad at her and told why we think she's a horrible person. She kept defending herself by saying the girl was a bee, or how she doesn't care what we think. On a similar note, I started high school in 1999 and it was a small, all-guys Catholic school. The Columbine massacre happened that year and a handful of other school shootings throughout the country. I was a loser in HS and was made fun of constantly. One kid who made fun of me a lot told me one day, verbatim, "When you bring a gun to school, don't shoot me," because I was only joking. I've heard other bad stuff, but I think that tops it easily. At an old job I had I was mercilessly bullied. Why I stayed as long as I did is beyond me. Anyways, a number of rumors were passed around that I owned guns and that I was the type of person who'd walk in and shoot the place up, so everyone should be nice to me. I don't own guns, and I'm a pacifist. People at work didn't know that. Yet, people suck with the things they say. This kid that I go to school with doesn't eat. IDKY. He is basically anorexic. Anyways, he told me that it was perfectly healthy because the poor kids in Africa do it all the time. Dude, what? I was telling a story that my co-worker at Publix told me from his deployment to the Mexico-Texas border to fight the war on drugs while I was at school. He is the nicest, hardest working person I've ever met. At the end of my story someone piped up, "And he works at Publix now?" People who work jobs like that to support themselves are pathetic. This was after I told him he had 2 Purple Hearts. Publix is actually a great place to work. They only promote from within. You can only get company stock as an employee. They have awesome benefits, etc. Last year when I was in high school, a close friend of mine suddenly died from cancer she didn't know she had. A couple of days later my friends and I were sitting in the hallway reminiscing about her when the music teacher walks up and says, "Why does everybody look so depressed?" To which my friend replies, "Because our friend died." The teacher gets this irritated look on her face and says, "Are you all still going on about that? Really? Cold-hearted C." I worked at a gas station back when Representative Gabrielle Giffords was shot in Tucson. We had the news on as the story was breaking. A customer remarked to me, as I was counting out his change, that they should, and I quote, "just let her die already. She's a Democrat." I stopped what I was doing and gave him a kind of surprised look. I couldn't believe someone had actually spoken those words. He noticed my expression and kind of backtracked and said, "No offense if you are. It's just that they've done a lot to screw up this country." I gave him his change and said, "I'm not a Democrat, but just No, man. Throughout the day, I had a total of 6 other people ask me whether Giffords was a Republican or a Democrat and respond positively, smiling, laughing, or cheering when I told them. It was the ugliest side of humanity I've ever witnessed in person. My co-worker called in sick one night. No big deal, it was slow. She and her boyfriend went on a date and on the way back home, they were hit by a semi-truck. Both were killed instantly and the car was mangled into an unrecognizable shape. When I got to work the next day, my co-workers told me what happened. My boss gets this really snarky tone and says, "See, if she'd just come to work like she was supposed to, she would still be alive." I hate that guy so much. I hope he steps on all the Legos. May all his coffee tables have sharp corners. I've told part of this story before, so I apologize if it's a repost for some of you. About 2 years ago my mother committed suicide. A little background. She went through treatment for breast cancer, lost her breast, lost her hair, and gained a good amount of weight due to the steroids. She was always proud of her looks and they were gone. She began drinking again after a stretch of sobriety. My mom always did crazy things when she wasn't sober, so her boyfriend, fed up for the last time, dumped her. Just prior to Mother's Day, she had been half staying with her mother to help her out as she is severely addicted to a host of pills that have rendered her unable to walk. My grandmother had always been a source of pain for my mom, and there were allegations of molestation when my mom was a child. With her drinking again, my grandmother felt that she could say any nasty thing she wanted. Actually, she always said whatever horrible thing she could think of and has caused a lot of pain for most of my family. All of this culminated in my mom's suicide. I have her notes so I know it to be not one single thing, but everything happening at once. Also, her breast cancer was gone, but the doctors diagnosed her with leukemia soon after. It was just too much for her. I flew to Florida the day after her suicide to make arrangements and have a service so everyone could say goodbye and share their feelings. My grandmother refused to speak because, knowing her penchant for being awful, said she was afraid she'd say something that would hurt everyone. I kind of appreciated her self-awareness, but that didn't stop her from looking me dead in the eye and saying, "I thought your mom believed in God." She knew that people who kill themselves go to heck. My husband had to physically restrain me from beating an 85-year-old woman to death in front of our entire family. I have never felt such rage in my entire life. Everyone else who'd been emotionally beaten by this woman 1,000 times already seemed unimpressed with her tongue lashing. Par for the course. My husband whisked me outside to calm me down. After an hour, I went back inside and told her that after I left, she'd never hear from me again, and I was thoroughly disgusted she could say something like that about her own child. Also, if she is in heck, to say hi to her when she gets there, and that was that. My best friend died when we were 14. She had been battling cancer for a while and eventually lost. At the viewing, my friends and I were, I think reasonably, pretty upset, and my friend told me later that her mother said we all looked really gross, crying all over each other like that. A guy on the bus complaining how he wouldn't get to the pub until about 8 in the evening because a family of 4 had the temerity to die in a horrible wreck. I must admit to losing my temper with him. Easy winner. I was taking a class with a teacher who had late stage cancer. He wasn't there most of the time. The one time he did come in was absolutely phenomenal. He spent an hour playing the piano, explaining the structure of songs and how that was influenced by the underlying aesthetic, comparing Yankee Doodle to La Marseillaise, a bunch of other stuff. About halfway through, he tried to tear 2 pieces of paper free from a single staple, and didn't have the strength to do it. I knew he didn't have long, but damned if he didn't finish his lecture and play music the entire time anyway. He died about a day after our first exam, and a week before the add drop period ended. This was an all-university curriculum class, or basically a gen ed that people would drop out of if it was going to tank their GPA. We had no grades so far, and people in the class freaked out. They were demanding that the new teacher go to the man's widow to get our exams, so that they could know whether to protect their precious GPA by dropping the class or not. Also, let's not forget, the new teacher had been this man's colleague and friend for over a decade, and was obviously shaken up by it. Literally the first and only question asked after this great and dedicated educator died a horrible, slow death was, "When are we getting our exam grades?" Go, it was utterly disgusting. When I attempted suicide many years ago, it was more of a symptom of clinical depression. I lost a lot of friends who claimed I was doing it for attention and refused to talk to me after that. One of my work colleagues left his long-term girlfriend because she was getting too old and he felt embarrassed that even the interns had younger and hotter girlfriends. Probably did her a favor. A former teacher of mine who had severe PTSD and depression from serving in the Middle East was accused of inappropriately touching a student shortly after returning to his teaching position. Said student made the allegations due to receiving a failing grade in his class. He was stripped of everything he had. He ended up getting stressed out so much that he snapped and shot himself. It sickens me when I hear about girls getting revenge against their teachers for bad grades, especially if the teacher is a veteran. When I was in junior high, I had a lot of severe gastrointestinal issues and I was told by doctors it was likely I had cancer. I chose to only tell 2 of my closest friends, we'll call them Jean and Anne. Before I was told of my likely cancer, I had been given a few other prognosizers that had been disproved that I had shared with Jean and Anne. When I told them about the cancer, Jane and Anne flipped. They said I was attention seeking, I was pathetic, I should kill myself and no one would ever miss me. The world would be a better place without me. This was at a spot in my life where I was already very suicidal, experimenting with self-harm, and many other simply unhealthy things. It sucked. Stopped talking to those P.S. I don't have cancer. I am now very healthy and on medication for my gastrointestinal issues. God, that's freaking horrible. A fellow gay classmate of mine died in a house fire a few years ago. He was very popular and when school was quiet, I was walking in the halls and someone in front of me said to the guy next to him, "I'm glad that F burned." The guy in front of him turned around and straight up clocked him in the face. Dude hit the ground like a sack of bricks. Butthole deserved getting clocked in the face. Hope I get a chance to do that sometime in high school. My tutor in high school had really bad diabetes and as a result put on a load of weight due to steroids and other drugs. She went into a diabetic coma one evening and people were saying that she ate herself into a coma. She tragically in her fragile state after waking up caught pneumonia and died. Some people said she deserved to die because she was fat. At her funeral, they laughed at her coffin and laughed even harder when it was wheeled in, which they do for most people now. Thankfully, they were overheard by another teacher and asked not to come back to school. Worst thing I've ever heard people say. Even relating this story makes me sick to my stomach. When I was in the 4th grade, a classmate of mine lost his mother to cancer. Not long afterwards, we had a show and tell day where we were to bring in something that was special to us. This boy brought in a metal slinky and explained that the reason it was important to him was because it was the last thing his mother got him before she died. Afterwards, as we were all walking to the cafeteria, one of the well-known little shitheads, actually the smallest kid in school but a huge bully because his father was a coach and his mother the school nurse, ran up to him and asked to see the slinky. The boy who lost his mother, thrilled that someone was actually speaking to him as he was normally ostracized and picked on, gladly handed it over to him. The little shithead then violently tied the slinky into several knots and threw it on the ground, ruining it. He ran away laughing to the cheers of the other students as the other boy just stared at the ground expressionless and obviously lost. The poor kid didn't even cry. That's fricked up. How did the other people around you react to him? His friends supported him and laughed. Him being twice my size and aggressive, I sat quietly like usual and stared at the floor as was my standard way of acting 12 years ago in early high school. I was stunned. I still remember not really thinking it happened, that someone could be so inhumane. It hurts my heart still thinking about it. I was standing in a cafe inside a university building, watching the TV, during 9/11. When the first tower fell, I slid down the wall I was leaning against in shock. At the same time, a bunch of the students, including some of my own, burst out in laughter. I'm from NYC. The university was a small, Midwestern one. For me, the image was hauntingly real. For them, it was too similar to something in a movie. We've destroyed NYC in so many movies. So, they laughed. My department chair, who I was next to, helped me get myself together enough to get to my office. Maybe less inhumane, more innocent brutality. But when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, every morning on the bus, a trio of Russian boys, all related, would mercilessly taunt a tiny 1st grade mouse of an Asian girl. They each ranged between 2nd and 4th grade. They would call her names, pull her hair, pinch her, try to steal her things, etc. And the bus driver never did a freaking thing about it, though the bus was less than 1/4 filled with kids who were relatively quiet. I even called attention to it once, and he completely ignored me. I think my concern made him sitter with me, though. When her dad finally had a talk with the driver and school admin, we sat at the very front of the bus, in direct view of the driver, but the little bastards kept bullying. I yelled at them to stop and smacked one's rolled up paper tube away as he kept smacking her in the head. She was perfectly silent the whole time, and they all suddenly turned all of their rage onto me until I tore the stupid tube away and threw it over the seat to the stairs, and the freaking brat punched me in the head. I could only manage a small smack in retaliation, because they leaned way back out of my reach, insulting me and sticking their tongues out, but they didn't go after me after the first day, probably seeing that I fought back, and I'm so glad I fought back. Felt like an 8-9-year-old Xena warrior sidekick. And when I told my family later, my mom even told me to beat them up the next day. I didn't do it, of course, lol. I was always 2nd smallest in my class. Sadly, though, the girl still disappeared a few days later. The middle kid is still a friend of friends now, and he seems to be a better person, but I still hold a grudge against him. That little girl did absolutely nothing to deserve all of that torment. TLDR. Small kids can be freaking mean and bus drivers are useless. Remember, most kids are 24 hours without parental supervision away from Lord of the Flies. This might get buried, but I was sitting with 2 of my roommates and some mixed company freshman year of college. They were having a small verbal exchange, friendly but slightly adversarial. Roommate 1 decided to escalate the exchange by roommate 2, at least my brother didn't molest me. The whole room went silent for about 5 seconds, at which point I did something I am proud of to this day. I looked at roommate 1 and said, that is by far the shittiest thing I have witnessed someone do, ever. That was completely inappropriate. You have to deliver some swift and harsh words when someone does something they deserve to be shamed for. People are dictated by social shamming. Things like that should happen more often. It would make him think twice before saying something like that again. Not too long after hearing news of a terrible school shooting in Germany, we suddenly heard loud gunshot noises in the hallway. Absolutely in panic, we all ducked only to find 2 of our male classmates walking in and laughing because they managed to scare us with their cell phone noises. Needless to say, a lot of people weren't amused and they got expelled. Everyone received a letter at home on code of conduct pretty instantly. I hope you took turns kicking them while they lay on the ground. When I was 14, I went on a trip with my dad to Lagos, Nigeria on a medical mission. My dad, a doctor, and a team of other doctors and nurses traveled by plane and bus for 20 long hours to a small village in Lagos. I was just along for the ride, and didn't really serve any other purpose than to help pass out bottles of medicine. On a trip through the city one morning with my dad, we spotted a smoking heap in the distance. The way everyone was walking past it would make you think it was simply a pile of burning leaves or smoking wood. However, when we got closer, to our absolute horror, we could see what it was. It was a man, or woman, I couldn't tell anymore. They had been burned to a crisp, literally, but his body was still intact. His arms were reaching out towards the street, as if he had been crawling, an attempt to crawl to safety in his last horrifying minutes of life. When we asked our guide what had happened, he responded nonchalantly, "They burn you if you steal." So this man had stolen something, probably out of hunger or need, and was sentenced to the most horrific, inhumane punishment my 14-year-old mind could conceive. I'll never ever forget that moment. That image. The image of his hands still grasping for safety, his naked, burnt body laying in the street, ignored by passerbyers, and most of all, his face. The look of someone screaming, the absolute terror and fear still lingering on his burning face. Can I go the opposite way? Everyone is talking about people saying mean things to others who have just lost someone, which reminded me of a completely different story that may have nothing to do with the ops question. When I was in elementary school, Things were good until the 3rd grade when I was switched into gifted classes. I have been and always will be slightly strange, and I like that about me, but it gave the kids so much ammo to tease me. Coupled with my quick to cry mentality, I was in the counselor's office every day crying and wondering why I couldn't make friends. I was nice to everyone. One day in the 4th grade, one of the girls that was meanest to me, her mother died. She was in class. I honestly don't remember the timeline, but she was very upset. I approached her and told her that I was sorry for her loss and that if she needed to talk I would listen. She promptly said, "Go away you fat ugly bee." I said, "Shut up. Don't call me that." Brilliant retort. And was sent to the principal's office where my mother was called in. The principal and the teacher urged me to apologize. My mom told them, "I'm really sorry that girl has lost her mother, but she's terrorized Gloria for 2 years, so I refuse to tell her to apologize." My mom's awesome. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.